December 26, 1900. A small ship approaches a remote lighthouse on Isle Moor, one of the Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland. The captain sounds his horn. No response. He fires a flare into the gray sky. Still nothing. Relief keeper Joseph Moore climbs the 160 stone steps alone, opens the door, and finds a scene frozen in time. The clock on the wall stopped. The kitchen table, set for a meal that was never eaten. A chair, overturned, like someone had stood up suddenly. The beds, unmade. Everything else, perfectly in order. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no explanation. Just an eerie silence and one final entry on the slate board, dated December 15th, ready to be copied into the official log. Storm ended. Seacom. God is over all. This is the Flannan Isles mystery. And for 124 years, nobody's been able to explain what happened to those 3 men. If you're into unsolved mysteries that'll keep you up at night, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches, because what you're about to hear isn't just a disappearance. It's one of the most baffling maritime mysteries in history. 3 men with years of experience, a lighthouse built to withstand anything the Atlantic could throw at it, and absolutely no logical explanation for what happened. The official investigation called it an accident. The local fishermen, they blamed ancient spirits that haunted the island. But the evidence tells a stranger story than either explanation could account for. Let's go back to December 1900, to a remote speck of rock 20 miles off the coast of Scotland, where something impossible happened. The Flannan Isles aren't just remote. They're the kind of place that makes hardened sailors nervous. 7 jagged rocks jutting out of the North Atlantic, about 20 miles west of the Outer Hebrides. Isle Moor, Big Island in Gaelic, is the largest, but it's only about 40 acres. Steep cliffs rising 150 feet straight up from the ocean. Constant wind. Brutal waves. The islands are named after St. Flannan, a 6th century Irish bishop who built a chapel there. But local legend said the place was haunted long before Christianity arrived. Fishermen called them the 7 Hunters. They bring sheep to graze on Isle Moor during summer, but they'd never stay overnight. The superstition was so strong that shepherds would leave before dusk, no matter what. Stories about the islands went back centuries. Mysterious lights seen when no one was there. Voices heard calling from the cliffs. Ships that passed too close and never reached port. In 1899, the Northern Lighthouse Board decided this death trap needed a lighthouse. Too many ships were wrecking on these rocks in the dark. The project was a nightmare. Every single building material, stone, cement, iron, glass, had to be hauled up 150-foot cliffs from supply boats. Workers built a railway system with cables to drag everything up the steep slopes. The lighthouse itself was an engineering marvel, 75 feet tall, stone walls 3 feet thick, built to withstand Atlantic storms that could generate waves over 100 feet high. It cost 6,300 pounds, about 920,000 pounds in today's money. Massive investment for the era. The lighthouse first lit on December 7th, 1899, just 1 year before the mystery that would make it infamous. The setup was standard for the time. 3 keepers on the island at any given moment, rotating every 6 weeks with a 4th keeper on shore leave. The job? Keep the light burning every single night. No exceptions. Ships' lives depended on it. The men who got the job were experienced professionals. This wasn't their first rodeo. James Duckett, 43 years old, principal keeper, 20 years of lighthouse experience, married with 4 kids back in Leith, known as steady, reliable, calm under pressure, the kind of guy you trust with your life in a crisis. Thomas Marshall, 28, second assistant keeper, younger, but already had solid experience. Unmarried, took his job seriously, had once been fined 5 shillings, significant money for a lighthouse keeper, for losing equipment in a storm. That fine would prove important later. Donald MacArthur, 40, the occasional keeper, filling in for William Ross, who was on sick leave. MacArthur was a big guy, tough, with a reputation as a brawler on the mainland, not someone who scared easily. He had a wife and 2 kids, 3 professionals, men who understood the sea, who'd survived countless storms, who knew the risks and how to handle them. In December 1900, they were alone on Eilean Moor, the only humans for 20 miles in any direction. December 15th, 1900, around midnight, the steamship Archdor was sailing from Philadelphia to Leith, Scotland, standard transatlantic route. The captain's log notes passing the Flannan Isles around midnight. The lighthouse wasn't lit. In clear weather, that light should have been visible for 20 miles. But that night, darkness. The captain made a note in his log, but continued to Leith. When the Archdor docked 3 days later on December 18th, he reported it to the Northern Lighthouse Board. The Flannan light was dark. The board didn't panic immediately. Sometimes fog could obscure a light. Sometimes equipment failed temporarily. These things happened. They'd already scheduled a routine relief for December 20th. The lighthouse tender Hesperus, the ship that brought supplies and rotated keepers, would check on the situation. But December 20th brought a massive storm. The Hesperus couldn't sail. Captain James Harvey and his crew waited at Breskleet on the Isle of Lewis, watching brutal weather hammer the coast. For 6 days they waited. Meanwhile, people on Lewis who could normally see the Flannan light on clear nights noticed something wrong. The light hadn't been visible for 10 days straight. Finally, on December 26th, Boxing Day, the weather cleared enough to sail. The Hesperus carried the relief keeper, Joseph Moore, along with the regular crew. Moore was supposed to rotate in, replacing one of the 3 men on the island. The voyage took several hours. As they approached Eilean Moor, Captain Harvey felt uneasy. Usually, when the relief ship appeared, the keepers would signal. Sometimes they'd be waiting at the landing platform. Nothing. Harvey sounded the ship's horn. The blast echoed off the cliffs. No response. He fired a flare. The bright streak arced into the gray sky. Still nothing. Something's wrong, Harvey said. Joseph Moore volunteered to go ashore alone to investigate. He climbed into a small boat and rowed to the east landing, one of 2 platforms where supplies were unloaded. The 160 stone steps up to the lighthouse compound must have felt longer than usual. The entrance gate to the compound was closed but unlocked. Moore opened it. The main door to the lighthouse was also closed. Not locked, just closed. That was the first strange thing. When a relief ship arrived, the door was always open. The keepers would be outside waiting, eager for news from the mainland, for mail, for supplies. Moore called out, "Duckett, Marshall, MacArthur." His voice echoed off stone walls. Silence. He stepped inside and climbed the spiral staircase. His footsteps rang on metal stairs. The kitchen was on the living level, and that's where things got really weird. The table was set for a meal. Plates out, cups ready, but no food on the plates. Like someone had been about to serve dinner and just stopped. One chair was overturned, knocked back like someone had stood up suddenly. The clock on the wall had stopped. Moore checked the bedrooms. 2 beds were unmade, normal for men who'd been working, but one bed was neatly made, suggesting someone hadn't slept in it the previous night. The lighthouse lamp room was in perfect order. The lenses were clean. The wicks were trimmed. The oil reservoirs were full. Everything ready to be lit for the evening. But it hadn't been lit on December 15th, or any night since. Moore checked the slate board where daily notes were recorded before being copied into the official log. The last entry was dated December 15th at 9 a.m. Weather observations. Wind speed, barometric pressure, temperature, all routine, all normal. The entry ended. Storm ended. Seacom. God is over all. That phrase, God is over all, wasn't standard weather reporting. It was personal, almost like a prayer. Moore searched every room. The storerooms, the coal room, the lamp room at the top. Nothing. He ran back down the 160 steps, nearly falling in his panic, and rowed back to the Hesperus. "They're gone," he told Captain Harvey. "All 3 of them. Just gone. Harvey sent 3 more men ashore, Buoy Master McDonald and Seaman Lamont and Campbell, all volunteers. They conducted a thorough search. They found more strange details. In the entrance hall, 2 of the 3 sets of oilskins, waterproof coats that keepers were outside, were missing from their hooks. But the 3rd set was still hanging there. That meant 2 men had gone outside in stormy weather. But the 3rd man, presumably the one whose oilskins were still inside, had gone out without protection. Why would an experienced keeper go outside in December North Atlantic weather without waterproof gear? The search party examined both landing platforms. The east landing, where they'd come ashore, was intact. Equipment store there was undamaged. But the west landing was a disaster zone. The west landing was where things got seriously disturbing. A wooden supply box that had been secured in a crevice 110 feet above sea level, higher than most waves could ever reach, was gone, completely destroyed, its contents scattered across the rocks. Iron railings bent like they were made of rubber, railing designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, twisted and deformed. A section of railway track, used to haul supplies up from the landing, had been ripped out of its concrete foundation and hurled up the cliff. A rock estimated to weigh over a ton had been displaced and moved. The damage suggested a wave of almost unimaginable power had hit the west landing. But for water to reach that high, 110 feet above sea level, would require a wave bigger than anything in recorded history for that location. Seaman Lamont and Campbell, both experienced sailors who'd seen major storms, stood looking at the destruction and couldn't make sense of it. No wave should be able to do this, Campbell said. Not at this height. But there was no other explanation. The iron was bent toward the cliff face, consistent with water impact. The railway track showed the same directional damage. Something had hit the west landing with catastrophic force. Captain Harvey formulated a theory and sent it in his telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Duckett, Marshall, and Occasional, have disappeared from the island. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane. It made sense on the surface. Marshall had been fined before for losing equipment. He'd be motivated to go out in a storm to secure the supply box. Duckett, as principal keeper, would have gone with him. Maybe MacArthur saw them in trouble and rushed out without grabbing his oilskins. A rogue wave caught them, swept all 3 into the Atlantic, bodies carried away by the current. Case closed, except nothing about the evidence actually supported that theory. Robert Muirhead, superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, arrived on Eilean Moor on December 29th to conduct an official investigation. Muirhead knew all 3 missing men personally. He'd recruited them. He'd visited the lighthouse as recently as December 7th, just 8 days before they disappeared. He was the last person to shake their hands and wish them well. Now, he had to figure out what happened to them. Muirhead examined everything. The lighthouse, the landing platforms, the log entries, the slate board, and the more he looked, the less sense Captain Harvey's theory made. Problem 1, the timeline. The last official log entry was December 13th. But the slate board had weather observations for December 15th at 9 a.m. That meant someone was alive and working normally on the morning of December 15th. They completed all morning tasks, trimmed the lamp, cleaned the lenses, filled the oil reservoirs, recorded weather data. The steamer Archdor noted the light was dark around midnight on December 15th. So something happened between 9 a.m. and midnight on December 15th. But here's the thing. There were no major storms reported in the area during that time. Weather stations on Lewis, 20 miles away, recorded moderate conditions on December 15th. Not calm, but nothing exceptional. Nothing that would generate waves capable of the destruction at the West Landing. Problem 2, the oilskins. 2 sets of oilskins were missing. 1 set was still hanging inside. Muir had examined the remaining oilskins and determined they belonged to Donald MacArthur based on size. So Duckett and Marshall went outside prepared for weather. But MacArthur, the tough guy, the experienced sailor, went out without protection? That made no sense. Unless he saw something that made him rush outside in a panic. Something so urgent he didn't take 5 seconds to grab his coat. Problem 3. The kitchen. The overturned chair bothered Muirhead. If the men were simply going outside to secure equipment. Routine work. Why was a chair knocked over? Why was the table set, but no food served? It suggested they were interrupted. Something happened suddenly. Problem 4. The West Landing damage. The destruction at the West Landing was consistent with massive wave impact, but the damage was localized. The lighthouse itself, just 300 yards away and at lower elevation, showed no storm damage at all. How could a wave violent enough to bend iron railings and displace a 1-ton rock leave the lighthouse completely untouched? Problem 5. 3 men. This was the biggest problem. Standard lighthouse procedure. If weather turned bad, you stayed inside. If equipment needed securing, you sent 1 man. Maybe 2 in truly severe conditions. But you never sent all 3 keepers outside at once. Never. That was the cardinal rule. Because if something went wrong, if a keeper got injured or swept away, you needed someone inside to send for help. All 3 men violated basic protocol. Experienced professionals who'd worked lighthouses for years. All 3 left the safety of the tower. Why? Muirhead's official report concluded. The evidence suggests that Duckett and Marshall ventured out to secure the supply box at the West Landing. An abnormally large wave struck them, sweeping both into the sea. MacArthur, witnessing this in the lighthouse, rushed out to help without taking time to grab his oilskins, and was caught by a subsequent wave. The report was filed. The case was closed. The families received death certificates listing probable drowning as cause of death, and the mystery should have ended there. But then the rumors started. In 1912, 12 years after the disappearance, a newspaper published excerpts from what they claimed was a lighthouse log, entries that painted a very different picture of what happened. According to these supposed log entries, December 12th, Marshall writing, severe winds the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. Duckett very quiet. MacArthur crying. December 13th. Duckett still quiet. MacArthur still crying. All of us prayed. December 15th. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. These entries became part of the legend. They suggested the men experienced something so terrifying that it broke them psychologically. MacArthur, the tough brawler, crying? That's horror movie territory. The entries implied a supernatural storm, something beyond normal weather, something that drove 3 experienced men to their breaking point. The phrase, God is over all, took on new meaning, not a routine sign-off, but a desperate prayer for men who'd faced something they couldn't explain. Newspapers ran with it. The Flannan Isles mystery became international news. Theories multiplied. Some said a sea serpent had taken them. Others claimed foreign spies had abducted them. Ghost ships, ancient curses, vengeful spirits. The problem? Those log entries were completely fabricated. In the 1920s, investigators went back to the original documents. The actual lighthouse log ended on December 13th with completely routine entries. No mention of unusual storms. No references to anyone crying or praying. Someone had made up those dramatic entries to sensationalize the story. But by then, the false version had become more famous than the truth. The legend had taken on a life of its own. Poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson wrote Flannan Isle in 1912, a haunting poem that referenced 3 men alive on Flannan Isle who thought on 3 men dead. The poem mentioned details that weren't in the actual evidence, like the uneaten meal and the overturned chair, but these invented details became part of the accepted story. Movies, books, songs, and TV shows have referenced the Flannan Isles mystery for over a century. Each retelling adds new layers of myth. But strip away the fiction, and you're left with the actual evidence, which is somehow even stranger than the legends. So what really happened? Let's look at the main theories, from most to least plausible. Theory 1, rogue wave. This is the official explanation, but it's got problems. Rogue waves are real. They're massive waves that appear without warning, sometimes in relatively calm seas. They can be 2 to 3 times larger than surrounding waves. A rogue wave hitting the west landing could have caught Duckett and Marshall. MacArthur sees it from the lighthouse window, rushes out to help, gets hit by a second wave. The overturned chair? MacArthur stood up suddenly when he saw his colleagues in danger. The missing oilskins? 2 men went to check on storm damage. Standard procedure. But the timing doesn't work. The slate showed morning tasks completed normally. The light wasn't lit that evening. That's a 12-plus hour gap. And why would they wait until evening, when it would be getting dark, to check on storm damage that occurred earlier? Theory 2, murder-suicide. This is darker. Donald MacArthur had a reputation for brawling. He was known to have a temper. Maybe he snapped, killed Marshall and Duckett, threw their bodies off the cliff, then jumped himself in guilt or panic. The overturned chair? A struggle in the kitchen. The missing oilskins? MacArthur staged it to look like an accident, but there was no evidence of violence in the lighthouse. No blood. No signs of struggle beyond one chair. And MacArthur had a wife and 2 kids. No apparent motive. Plus, how would he overpower both men? Duckett and Marshall together would have been able to stop him. Theory 3. They tried to leave. Maybe they decided to abandon the lighthouse. Something spooked them. Something made them want off the island immediately. They took one of the supply boats and tried to sail to Lewis. Got caught in a storm and drowned. But this makes no sense. Lighthouse keepers didn't have boats on the island. The relief ship brought supplies and departed. There was no way to leave between relief visits except swimming, which would be suicide in December. Theory 4, accident at the West Landing. This is actually the most plausible scenario, but with details that don't quite fit. Thomas Marshall had been fined before for losing equipment. On December 15th, he notices the supply box at the West Landing is at risk. Maybe the ropes securing it are coming loose. He tells Duckett, the principal keeper. They both go to secure it, wearing oilskins because the weather's rough. While they're working, a rogue wave hits. Not during a major storm, just one massive, unpredictable wave in otherwise moderate seas. This happens. Fishermen call them sleeper waves. The wave is so powerful it bends iron railings and displaces a ton of rock. Duckett and Marshall are swept away instantly. MacArthur is in the lighthouse, maybe preparing dinner. That's why the table's set. He looks out the window and sees what happened. He rushes outside without thinking, doesn't grab his oilskins, runs to the West Landing. A second wave catches him. All 3 gone in minutes. The problem? The window theory. Could MacArthur really see the West Landing from the lighthouse kitchen? Investigators checked. The angle's wrong. He wouldn't have had a clear view. So, how did he know they were in trouble? Let's talk about the stuff that doesn't fit into rational explanations. The local fishermen never doubted what happened. To them, it was obvious. The island took them, old sailors would say. The 7 hunters claimed 3 more. The Flannan Isles had a reputation going back centuries. The stories weren't just superstition. They were warnings based on real incidents. Ships that got too close to the islands often reported strange phenomena. Lights moving across the cliffs when no one was there. Voices calling from rocks when no one could stand. In 1895, during lighthouse construction, workers reported feeling watched, hearing footsteps in the night, tools going missing and reappearing in wrong locations. Some workers refused to stay overnight on Eilean Moor. They'd work until dusk, then insist on being taken back to Lewis. Even though the boat trip was dangerous, the foreman dismissed it as superstition. But construction delays and accidents mounted. When the lighthouse finally opened in December 1899, several keepers requested transfers after just weeks on the island. They wouldn't explain why, just said they wanted off. Duckett, Marshall, and MacArthur had been there a year. Had they experienced something that built over time? Something that reached a breaking point on December 15th? The phrase God is over all on the slate takes on different meaning in this context. Not just a weather observation. A reminder. A ward against something. St. Flannan himself was said to have fought demonic forces on the island. His chapel was a sanctuary against whatever dwelled in the caves below the cliffs. Did something come for the 3 keepers? Did they go outside not to secure equipment? But to face something that couldn't enter the lighthouse? We'll never know. But the fishermen who refused to land on Eilean Moor after dark probably didn't care what the official investigation concluded. They knew. 124 years later, we still don't know what happened on December 15th, 1900. The bodies of James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were never recovered. Their families never got closure. The Northern Lighthouse Board implemented new safety protocols after the disaster. Never again would all three keepers leave the lighthouse simultaneously. New rules required detailed log entries every shift. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse continued operating until 1971, when it was finally automated. No more keepers living on the island, just machines. In 2018, a film called The Vanishing dramatized a mystery, offering one interpretation involving moral corruption and violence. But the truth? The actual evidence? 3 professional lighthouse keepers vanished from an isolated island in perfect working conditions. No storm severe enough to explain the destruction at the West Landing. No logical reason why all 3 would leave the lighthouse. No bodies ever found. Just an empty tower, an overturned chair, and that final entry. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. Maybe it was a freak accident. A rogue wave hitting at precisely the wrong moment, catching all 3 men in a cascade of terrible luck. Maybe it was something darker, a psychological break, a violent confrontation that ended with 3 deaths and staging to hide the truth. Or maybe the old fishermen were right. Maybe the Flannan Isles are cursed. Maybe some places in this world don't want humans living there. And maybe on December 15th, 1900, the 7 hunters took back what was theirs. I lean toward the rogue wave theory personally. Freak accidents happen at sea. Statistics say it's possible, if improbable. But I'll tell you this, I wouldn't spend a night alone in that lighthouse for any amount of money. Because the one thing we know for certain is that 3 experienced, professional, rational men vanished without a trace from a locked building on a remote island. And whatever happened in those final moments, it happened fast enough that they didn't have time to write it down. So what do you think? Freak accident? Murder? Or something we can't explain? Drop your theory in the comments. If you're into unsolved mysteries that'll keep you up at night, subscribe and hit that bell. Share this with someone who loves a good mystery. And remember, next time you see a lighthouse, think about the keepers who kept those lights burning, often in the most isolated, dangerous places on Earth. Most of them did their jobs and went home safely, but 3 of them didn't. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe stay away from remote Scottish islands.